Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the left, I'm David Jones.
Tonight we are going to discuss city issues and the candidates running for Houston City Council District C. Joining us tonight are first, Paul Bettencourt of Bettencourt Tax Advisors and former Harris County Tax Assessor Collector. Sylvia Garcia, former Harris County Precinct 2 Commissioner and the host of This Week with Sylvia Garcia on UC-TC Radio, and Sylvia is also a lawyer. And Dr. D.C. Cofield, Senior Pastor of Good Hope Missionary Baptist Church and a former president of the NAACP Houston branch, but they're all still real people.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you're a former chairman of the Republican Party.
Absolutely. You're a former whatever.
I've never done anything to be former of. Okay?
David, you're former squared, but we'll take it.
So we have District C coming up. The candidates who are fighting for District C are going to be running in an area that's roughly defined by the Heights, my neighborhood, Garden Oaks, Meyerland, Montrose, Braeswood. If I've left out a neighborhood, I apologize. Y'all can fill it in. And it's a term-limited Ann Clutterbuck former district. And so, Sylvia, since you're the first former that I'm looking at, why don't you tell us who looks strongest in District C?
Well, obviously, this is one of the races to really watch for city council races. It's been really interesting. It's a very diverse group of people running to represent a very diverse district. It appears from everybody I've talked to, looking at who's gotten endorsements, looking at the money raised, looking at who's really had a real campaign going on from day one, it looks like Ellen Cohen is probably the person to beat. I don't know that it's hers to lose, but she's certainly the one to beat. I think you've got Cweren Derr, who's run before for an at-large seat. Also has gotten a couple of endorsements herself, now running in a district where she works in the Heights and used to live in your old neighborhood of Garden Oaks. So she's someone to watch. And, of course, the Republican in the race is Cweren. And I think he's gotten the C Club, he's gotten the party endorsement. So it may shape up as a Democrat versus Republican kind of deal, and that may force a runoff.
I think a runoff is certain, Sylvia. That's my guess, because not only do you have the candidates you mentioned, you've also got another candidate, Josh Verde, who is running to Ellen Cohen's left. He's running as the openly gay candidate against the GLBT-endorsed Cohen, who is the former state rep, as you know. So I think that without a doubt there's a runoff. I think Brian Cweren is running a very good campaign. But you can't count out Cweren Derr because she's very strong in the Heights, and she could end up being in the runoff as well. But either way, I think statistically we're going to have a runoff in this election.
So you think there'll be one for sure?
Almost assuredly.
So who do you think will make it? Will it be Cweren or Derr?
I think right now, you have to say that probably Cohen and Cweren are probably 1 and 2, but a very close photo finish. But Cweren is quite capable of turning out a big Garden Oaks Heights turnout because she's got a lot of friends there.
Let me ask DZ to comment on this aspect of one of these candidates, and if you force me to name the candidate, I will. But on one of them says that he pledged under no circumstances ever will I vote to increase your taxes. And he also said that District C needs a new fire station and we need more cops. So I guess the broader issue for you to address is politics really that bad a game these days that people can still get away with saying that?
I think there's a sense that everyone expects new politicians to be naive and to say things that they think people want to hear. I'm not sure. I hope that they really don't believe those things. I think what's interesting about this district is in cutting out Montrose and putting it in the C and cutting it out of D, in the past, there was never enough of an influence in Montrose to elect a candidate in District D. The people who ran in D as a predominantly African-American district knew that you had to get the votes in Montrose. They couldn't put you in by themselves, but they could keep you out. And so it's just going to be interesting now, this hodgepodge, this mixture, which in some ways, with the absence of the minority community, really represents such a broad spectrum of the city of Houston, just what is actually going to come out of this, or who is going to come out of this. And so, I'm not sure. It just find it hard to believe that somebody can actually think that we're going to believe that, no new taxes. I mean, we've kind of heard that one before.
Come on, Paul. And that's your line.
I know, I was going to say, there's nothing
fees?
wrong with no new taxes, and especially in a year where people are so concerned about what's going on at the federal level, what the federal deficit is. I think that actually is a pretty good campaign plan for Brian Cweren. I think he's going to get a lot of votes because of it.
And that's who said it.
Of course it is, because he's the fiscal conservative in the race. That's why I think he'll make the runoff for sure.
But Paul, I think any candidate would say that. No, I will not raise taxes. But I think the real question becomes...
I'm pretty sure no one else is saying that in this race. But.
No, I've asked that question for all the candidates that come through my show on This Week with Sylvia Garcia, and there's not been one who says, "Oh no, I'm prepared to look at raising taxes."
Then you hadn't had Stephen Costello on.
I only did the contested and the new, but we did this race. Okay. But the reality is, what we have to look at is what's going to happen with the economy, what's going to happen with revenues, what's going to happen with demand, and just the growth. I mean, you can't expect us to hit past 2 million and not have to really worry about having to do services and all the things necessary to make sure all those 2 million people can have a good quality of life.
The city council that's sitting right now has majority voted for the following three things. One, they voted to raise all residential water rates in the city by 40%, which will leave us the second highest water rates in the nation besides San Diego, where they pipe the water over the mountains into the city. Two, the vast majority of the city council voted for the drainage tax, which is like a 15% increase in property taxes. And three, what we're seeing is almost all of them voted to raise all fees on all local businesses by 250%. I think Brenda Stardick carried that. And so we've already had three big tax increases. And so there's billions of dollars of revenue that's going to flow into city coffers over the next 20 years coming from the taxpayers. And that's why people like Brian Cweren are going to get some traction, because they're saying, wait, stop. That's enough.
Well, in talking a little bit about this race and the traction, I think the big issue, at least as far as I'm concerned, is who's going to vote. I mean, what is driving people to the polls this election? We don't have a hotly contested mayor's race. I mean, Mayor Parker has her critics, but she also has $2.5 or $3 million to spend, and she has opponents that they'll be lucky if they raise or spend $25,000 or $30,000. That's not going to drive people in. Ron Green's unopposed, so the high-profile races are not there. So, any insight into who shows up on Election Day, or are we going to have a low turnout?
I think we're going to have another low turnout, just like we did 2 years ago. And I think the candidates that have either run before, have money to get on TV, or have a really strong street campaign are the ones who are going to come out and get the votes and get into that runoff. I mean, I think it's noteworthy that Brian does have the Republican Party endorsement, because the Republican Party puts money into it, puts out flyers, does any phone calling. That does help Brian.
Will they be doing that this particular election, Mr. Bettencourt, Mr. Polland?
Brian Cweren has on his webpage that he's endorsed by the Republican Party. So unless he's
but that falls in what you talked about, Sylvia, about and Paul talked about Karen Derr, grassroots activists, I guess, community activists.
Which is why you can't rule her out.
Right. So the
turnout's very low. This is going to be
especially district races.
Right.
So she can win. So she could make the runoff. Right. With a turnout model.
Well, and she's got the employee unions, HOPE and SEIU, and that's all they do is street campaign.
Define SEIU, please.
It's the Service International Employees Union.
Yes,
the ones who are occupying Wall Street. I remember now.
Well, no, there's a number of people occupying Wall Street, but I don't know.
And the ones that are occupying Wall Street or the federal building will come back and vote in this election, I'm sure. And it's really about the fact that turnout is probably in the teens. This is going to be a very low turnout city election.
I agree.
And so you could have somebody like Karen Derr get enough turnout to get into the runoff, or people can perceive a front runner in their minds like Ellen Cohen, but she doesn't have a ground game. Clearly, Mr. Cweren will have some people pushing some turnout, but more importantly, there's a poll from the national election where generally conservatives are very dissatisfied with what's going on in the country. They're more motivated by every poll I've seen to turn out and vote. So I think he'll get a bump from that.
And they're living in Tomball, and we don't need to worry about them in city elections.
Do you have a sense of the at-large seat with Jolanda Jones being in a hotly contested race?
Yeah, I don't know. I really think Jolanda's in trouble, to be honest with you, because, again, with a low voter turnout, and, she has a very viable candidate, not anyone to the extreme right, but one that I think cuts into her already existing base. I think she's going to have a major problem. And again, I think you all are right when you look at the top three candidates. Whenever you have a ground force in place in a low voter turnout, you can mobilize people to come out beyond the endorsements that people will look at and go, okay, that's nice, she was endorsed by that person, but that's not going to necessarily get people out to vote for you.
Well, DZ's right, because it's interesting, there's a good parallel between the at-large Jones race and this race in C. There will be a runoff in both races. The question is who's going to be in it.
And it's
Right now, and when you look at Yolanda Jones' race, you've got Jack Christie in there. You've also got Bob Ryan in there. There's other candidates. Lauren Robinson, very good candidate. So there's no question there's a runoff. But in that race, given what the incumbent's troubles are, I'm not even sure she even makes a runoff.
Yeah.
Because clearly you can see where she could be placed third. So, but these are going to be low turnout elections, lots of runoffs, and it's just because this is an inflection year in politics. People are angry, especially on after the recession, especially on the conservative side, and there will be a conservative in each of these runoffs. That much is for
actually,
sure.
It appears now, Paul, they're angry on the liberal side too.
Oh, I agree. Right.
Well,
yeah,
I disagree with him. I think Yolanda Jones will be in a runoff, and she might ultimately win. I mean, the reality is, you've been on the ballot since term limits. There's been no city council member that's had opposition that has succeeded. I mean, in fact, I'm the only one who's beat anybody since term limits.
Well, back to
That's an
District C,
incumbent.
though. Back
Well,
to District
and I'm
C.
just
What
saying, though,
endorsements are going to matter in District C? In a low turnout race, there are maybe endorsement groups that are actually going to put something in people's hands and say, you have to go vote for our person, such as the Gay and Lesbian Political Caucus or whatever its new name is, and they will get a vote out for Ellen Cohen.
There are only two endorsements to me that matter, and that's the ones that produce money and the ones that produce volunteers. I mean, other than that, they really don't matter. And
But DZ, I'd add a third one. The ones that produce votes are really important. Okay,
But which are those these days, Paul?
Well, I mean, the formers, the three formers like us, will have a following. There will be organizations that will have a following. This is an election where individual votes do make a difference, and who turns out really going to decide it, because this is going to take a runoff to win and see, and it will be in some of these at-large races. And I'll predict, Sylvia, there's going to be some incumbents will lose their election for the first time in 2011 since you ran.
I just don't think, Paul, to be honest with you, I'm not sure people really care enough at this point. I think
that's where the low turnout comes in, where
there's been
a
very
good ground
little buzz
game.
about it.
Right,
So
but I think there's
I
think there's even less of a buzz and a less of an interest than has been in the past. I mean, to be honest with you, people are trying to put food on the table every day. They're really not. Yeah, they're really not concerned about who's voting, and that's why I think the people who put volunteers on the floor and on the streets and can mobilize people and encourage people to come out and vote, and people who have the money, those two people are going to be the people that I think are going to mobilize the most people to come out and vote.
Well, let's talk. We're talking about city issues. Paul talked about taxes, and of course those were fees, David. I mean, Paul, not taxes.
A tax is a fee, and a fee is a tax.
I understand. But Paul suggested before we segue back into the race that in the city of Houston's got all this massive increase in revenue coming in. You shouldn't count Prop 1 because that's dedicated funds. But that's coming in, so there shouldn't be any money problem for the city to, fully fund the programs that are necessary.
I mean, there's no infusion of dollars coming in. I mean, the drainage fee that he talked about is specifically for drainage. I mean, that doesn't help pay the police and fire. It doesn't help fill up the potholes. Doesn't fill up, work with the water
actually, it does
sewer
take
rates.
care of the potholes.
Not the potholes.
Rebuilding the roads.
Sure, well, that's what it's designed to do.
If they do that, but the reality is, it's a tough economy. Things are not going to change anytime soon. I agree with him. People have jobs undermined. It's about getting a job that gives them a good way to provide for their families and have a good quality of life. And it's not going to change. So there's no influx of revenues The challenges will still be there for the city. The budget will be tight. They'll have to face layoffs again. They're going to have to face the pension fund. Now they're going to have to start worrying about the drought and potentially, where more water may come from. There's a lot of issues there that
the
really
pension thing is
away.
legislature. The legislature can help there, and so isn't District C better off with a former legislator, Ellen Cohen, who will get her calls returned in Austin, at least?
Well, which party is controlling Austin.
I was going to say she's on the wrong party right now.
I think it's to me it's really also about is Mayor Parker going to spend money just to remind people she's on the ballot, to make sure her numbers are shored up. Because if she gets on TV, that reminds voters there's even an election. Because
good point.
Mayor Parker has very low approval ratios
Paul,
on the
now,
drainage
I don't
tax.
know that if you stop the average person on the street, 10 of them, that half of them would know there's an election coming on. But if Mayor Parker spends money on TV, they'll all say, "Oh, look at that! There's an election." So that's a key question.
Somebody tell us what these candidates are for. What are they? What does their background suggest they're going to be leading the city to accomplish? I mean, are they just filling chairs, as they wait for their next political move?
You mean when the term limited 6 years from now, David?
Yeah.
You know what? I tell you what's interesting, and this is no offense to any of the city council members, but I was speaking to a former city council member who described the process as King Kong and 14 chimpanzees, or, in this case, I guess we're adding, 2 or 3 more seats, that the city council members really don't have the power. The power's in the mayor. And so I don't know what difference they plan on making, and I don't know what difference they can make, to be honest with you. I mean, besides, offering motions and things like that.
What would you like them to do, Mr. Cofield?
I think there's, to me, there's several things. One, and I think it's more difficult in an at-large position, as opposed to a local district seat. But I think one is be more concerned about the whole community. I think all of us are hit with a myriad of issues, and when you have a council member who picks one issue, to focus on, and it's almost at the exclusion of other issues, then the question is, how do you address all of these issues? And I think the other issue is just collaboration. For so many years, I think the city has not collaborated with other agencies like the county, like the school district, like HCC. Each of these are talking about raising their own taxes and doing their own things. You have after-school programs. The city funds some. School district has some things going on. The county has their own Department of Education. I don't know what they do.
It should be eliminated, trust me. And that's part of the problem.
That's something we actually agree on.
Yeah, we do. Because it's redundant.
And it's not a county department. It's a separate department. It collects its own money. So most people think it's a county department, but it's not.
Redundant. Mm-hmm. It should go. Now,
I agree with Paul. It should be done away with.
Back to the city, and Sylvia knows this too. The city's got some really big problems on the financial side of balancing the balance sheet over the long term. We've already seen billions of dollars come off the city's balance sheet because they've got big problems with pensions. They've got big problems with unfunded health care costs. We're looking at $8 to $9 billion over the next 20 years. But we've also already, look, when you raise residential water rates by 40%, that's the worst regressive tax you can have because you're plastering people in the fourth ward to pay water, which is absolutely needed for sustainability in any family or any individual. Now, what I want to see, David, to your question is we've got to get some business people in city government to look at efficiencies, to try to get our operating budgets under control. There is a real fiscal crisis at the city. They are in the hole for billions of dollars on pension and health care costs.
He's
alone.
making an argument for a tax increase, isn't he, Sylvia? I mean, he's
no. I think you
but I think we
get
do
your
have
expenses.
some business people on city council.
Name them.
Well, Costello is in business. He's the one who came up with the drainage.
Right, the
issue.
greatest single tax increase in the city of Houston's history.
But you want business people there. I'm just telling you, there are.
I want business people that look to getting
Alvin Pennington is a business person.
Okay, I want business people that will look to getting the city off the taxpayers' back.
But isn't one of the problems that the city faces is it gets micromanaged from Austin? That they can't solve their pension problem in Houston. They've got to go to Austin to solve the pension problem because everything has to go through the legislature.
And that's true.
It is. There's no question, Gary. That's right. Sylvia knows this. And the problem is that all the pension funds are effectively tied up under state supervision, effectively out of the legislature. That's where if you make changes, you have to get state laws changed. the bottom line
Good
with
luck
that
with
is,
that one, right?
yeah, and it's we're obviously the largest city in the state, and of course we're under effectively state control in that regard. But when you look at, you've got to balance the needs of the taxpayer's ability to pay with city services that DZ is talking about. And Sylvia was in the comptroller job; she knows it's a tough job, but bottom line is that we've had 3 huge tax increases already that people are paying, and enough's enough. And I think that's what's turbocharging the Republican Party. These debates that are ongoing nationally are getting a lot of interest in the Republican Party. I think this Republican Party endorsement means a lot in this race.
He continues. He really wants to get into Obama's politics, I think. He just really just determined.
It's for another show.
It's a referendum on Obama. That's what it is.
Absolutely.
He continues to mix fees that are designated for specific purpose with a tax rate increase, and there are 2 totally different
But
things.
Well, you were
And
city.
challenges will
She
still
was
be
actually
there.
city controller.
The challenges will be there, and David, the one issue that we did ask during our show with all these candidates, which I think most of them had not even thought about, is this whole water issue. I mean, we really have to look at making a long-term plan about where we're going to be getting our water, not just next week, but 5, 10, and 20 years. There will be water fights among counties, among states, because everybody's got the same problem.
Okay, well,
and
Paul,
we can't take things for granted in Houston.
Well, Paul says when we raised water fees 40%. Does that mean that the city has revenues now available to start working on a long-term plan, as opposed to saying
Well, they gotta
we'll
pipe
have
it in from
surface
Lake
water
Conroe,
forever?
Paul. That's-
Well, I would hope so.
Not quite over
I
the
would hope
mountains,
so.
DZ. Yeah, that's right.
Quite over the
I
moon.
don't know that there is a plan or not, but if there isn't, I think that's something that Mayor Parker needs to put on her list.
Let me Paul, address this, because Sylvia has been alluding to it, and DZ is probably closer to it than any of us are, and that has to do with quality of life and people paycheck to paycheck, and some people living in ever deteriorating circumstances. And a tax increase, sometimes you have to say, is necessary if you want to make sure that people's lives are sustained in some ways. I mean, I just saw the city budget. 60% of it is police and fire. The next largest item is debt service. Debt service dwarfs whatever it is that we spend on servicing human capital. It dwarfs it, really.
That's the
and so, I
operating
mean,
budget, Dave.
is the city of Houston really going to be a first-class city with that type of finance problem?
Dave, that's the general fund, okay? But right now, water rates have gone up 25%. In 2 more years, they'll be up 40%. There's money coming into the city coffers for some of these problems. You don't need to go add another tax increase onto this. And already, for example, the city has about 3 weeks of cash on hand. That's how close to the wire they are. It was never this close when she was comptroller. But
it was a different economic time.
I understand, but
let's make sure we keep things in perspective.
But we've just popped the roof off of the water rates that people pay on their homes. We've got this drainage tax that is literally like adding hundreds of millions of dollars of additional revenue, and then and I think it was Councilwoman Stardick who was proud to raise fees in the Houston Chronicle by 250%.
Yeah, but
we have to stop this.
But the drainage fee and the infrastructure fee combination, Paul, fulfilled a need that almost everyone acknowledged was there.
Gary, but you're just swapping money. All you're doing is
I understand.
okay.
But what happened was, and to be fair, the money that was set aside for doing infrastructure was spent in other ways by the politicians who ran the city.
This
is the context. So then there's a need that everyone knows the streets are falling apart. We don't have the flood control we need when the rain ever comes again.
Ever.
We're hoping God gives it to us.
But that's a general fund
problem.
issue, Gary. Here's the
general fund is what we all live under.
Well,
Paul.
that's where police and fire.
That's what delivers the basic services.
Which
your
I'm saying
parks,
are
your libraries, the
here's an
lights,
issue.
police, fire,
I'll ask
and
Sylvia
that has we have to find a way to sustain that. And
All right.
I think it does take some cuts. I think it does take some efficiencies, and I think it does take a lot of hard work.
I could
everybody.
I could add $80 billion to the general fund's bottom line by getting rid of all these tax increment reinvestment zones. The city has tersed itself to death We've got high dollar properties like the Galleria Memorial City where they keep the money and they end up buying gold-plated lampposts instead of using the money in the general fund. And liberals and conservatives can agree, because if you're going to have that money, you want it spent on real problems in the city,
well, you get to
and
make
not
decisions.
overspend on some sky bridge from
Because
the
you've subcontracted the
CEMEX plant office building to Memorial City Mall. It's crazy
You've
expenditures.
subcontracted the decision-making under TERS
That's
to
correct.
organizations
Unappointed.
away from the elected officials. Is
Right.
that a good idea, Dr. Cofield?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you know, one part of the city can't rise and another part of the city fall. You know, a comprehensive strategic plan needs to be put on the table that says how can we become the most effective and efficient city we can be. And I agree with Paul. You know, although I don't know why he looked at me when he said liberals and conservatives can agree.
I was just looking past Sylvia.
No, but
I feel like I'm the moderate
but I
in the
do
middle.
agree. I think the intent of TERS and the purpose of the TERS was one thing. I think it's been manipulated and it's been taken out of its
horribly
original.
distorted.
Well, I think they should be reviewed as well as the management districts.
Oh, I agree.
I think they started out to really help stress communities.
Sure.
But I think it's like everything else. Once you lift yourself up to a certain level, it's time to graduate. You
Right.
know,
Let me-
let's do something
quick-
different.
Very good.
Just a very quick yes or no answer to this one. Mayor Parker has a lot of money. Should she be picking by endorsements and or giving money to some of these councilmen and members so that she gets a city council that she wants? Yes or no? Should she?
No.
Not good practice, I don't think.
She shouldn't, because she needs to be spending money on herself, because she's got an approval ratio of 20-some-odd% on the drainage fee alone.
Why was I surprised that he couldn't do that in yes or no? Hey, thanks to everybody for being here. Thank you very much. It was fun. We invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Click on the local program bar, red, white, and blue. Read about our guests, watch the shows, along with our follow-up discussion.
Coming up next, after tonight's Red and White and Blue show, is the Houston Area League of Women Voters debate featuring the candidates running for Houston District C, moderated by Ernie Manous of Houston PBS. So
Until
tune
next
in.
time, get informed and get active.
Go get them, Ernie.
You talk too long.